Okay, you are all set to start. You are live on YouTube.
Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Tom Hanson. I'm the chairman of the WPCA in Madison, and this is our June 24th meeting. The WPCA meets quarterly, and we haven't, because of Corona, we haven't met since the December 2019 meeting. So we're going to begin the meeting now with the attendance. And we have with us Mark Aaron, Peter Pastore, Graham Curtis, and Tom Lonsdale. And who did I miss?
And Trent Joseph.
And Trent, okay, yeah, well, there's 5 members of the WPCA though. Tom, Mark, Peter, Graham, and oh, and me. Me would be the 5th one, wouldn't it? Okay, everybody got that? And with us, of course, is Graham, Trent Joseph. Trent is the town public health director and sanitarian. And Lauren Rhines is also sitting in from the Selectman's office. So if there's any private citizens listening in and have questions or want to make comments, this is your opportunity to do so, either now or at the very end of the meeting if you join us late. Are there any?
There is no public on the meeting right now.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yep.
So let's get the agenda up and see what we got to deal with here. Agenda. Can people see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. On item 2, the minutes of the meeting from December 2019, the minutes were submitted. I don't know if I recirculated them, but it's been quite a while. If anyone wants to comment on the minutes now, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and just move on to the next item. Okay. Citizens' comments, we talked about. Health Director's report. Trent, sorry to hear you're having problems with your Achilles, but maybe you can fill us in with some recent information on the septic systems in town, projects that are ongoing, we're having, etc. Why don't you take the floor and give us a report?
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. So, you know, aside from COVID, we've been receiving a lot of applications for soil testing. It seems like, you know, after the initial phase 1, let's say, of COVID and the quarantine, I'm gonna probably give a timeline of probably the mid-March to the end of April. After the end of April, we started to see more of a surge of soil testing being done for repairs pretty much everywhere around town, North Madison, south of the 95, and they've been scattered. You know, otherwise, you know, a lot of repairs, plenty engineered septic systems going in. And to be clear, I guess for the record, you know, we try to work with septic contractors frequently and more fluidly to determine and kind of develop a general subsurface sewage disposal system for residential properties if we can. Whenever we require engineered plan, it's likely because of the characteristics of that particular lot. It's either a lot of ledge rock or high groundwater, or or it's sometimes filled wetlands. So, you know, we've been having a lot of actually PE plans being submitted because we're getting a lot of problematic properties, and they're really significant to their own topography. So that's where we're seeing some challenges, but otherwise, no real failures, no notification of failures. I mean, there has been, let's see, since our last meeting, there's probably been maybe 6 systems that were reported to be failing. And I mean by failing, that's effluent surging the grade, and you able to see sewage on someone's property, which would require emergency repair. So about 6 since our last meeting, but otherwise, a lot of repairs are just a lot of systems are antiquated, they're getting to their 30-year mark, 32-year mark. They've been, a lot of people are living with the original system, the system that the year the house was built. So, that's what we're seeing now. And, a lot of other houses and dwellings are looking to do, obviously, a lot of renovations and building additions, obviously also because COVID, a lot of people want to now move their in-laws in and have that accessory apartment or outhouse or pool house. And, that's going to require repair to upgrade the septic system. So we're seeing a lot of that. Otherwise, no big problems commercially in town. Obviously, there's maybe a handful, maybe two to four establishments, it's restaurants that, we have to keep a close eye on just because, their systems are near that expiration, and, we're just monitoring their flow and kind of water conservation for them. Thankfully, a lot of these restaurants aren't having dine-in. So, meals served has changed, and which is, then has affected, dishwashing and the amount of grease accumulation that would enter a septic system with, just a limited amount of meals being prepped or prepared to serve. So otherwise, unless there's questions, that's all I have here from the health department.
All right, thanks, Trent. Let me start with just a couple of comments. First of all, in spite of your incredible workload, which must be driven by this COVID-19, I personally want to thank you for the comprehensive nature of your attention to the septic systems in town. I know there's a lot of people, like Mark Aaron, for example. I heard from that guy. He's a big complainer, but but I know there's systems that require your attention, and Samantha as well. And it's a lot to keep up with. And I really just want to go on record saying I appreciate the effort and the attention to the systems that are going in.
Thanks, Tom.
It seems like the restaurants will probably have a good resting period here because they've either been shut down or greatly reduced. And that would bode well for, their performance when they start up again. Are there any projects that you're feeling any kind of pressure to approve that would make you uncomfortable? Any projects like that going on?
Thankfully, no, there aren't any projects at this time that make me feel uncomfortable. I mean, there's still the, I think it's 4 Boston Post Road.
Right.
Yeah. That one, it's always going to be something where it's a lot of gray area, and, the state is heavily involved, Bob Scully. Aside from that one, most of the design flows of these proposed buildings are pretty straightforward in terms of new construction, right? So, what I mean by that, to clarify, we have, big like Milano developments. That's like a lot of storage area, office space. The sewage is not as problematic, right? But other situations like this one, like the 4 Boston Post Road, where there's fill wetlands, there's not a lot of naturally occurring soil. Those are the ones where you just want to keep a close eye on, and not purposely scrutinize, but you just got to be a lot more hands-on.
Yeah, have you gotten a submittal from them on that?
There's a lot of there's a lot of things being submitted, but I think it's on hold right now. I think the
Yeah.
design, so nothing we've gotten something, but nothing where I have done an official review to give my comments on.
Okay. And that'll probably go to DEP anyway, right?
Yeah, so it'll probably go to DEP, whether or not they stay within their what essentially it won't go to DEP unless if they stay within their ancient design flow, if you will. So they have a history to have a restaurant there. So that's some of the documentation that's been provided. They provided proof that this was actually a restaurant years ago, and I believe the state has said if they stay within that design flow, they're kind of okay to be grandfathered in to that flow.
Is that the kind of a system that you might be able to exert some influence for maybe passive nitrogen removal, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, we've thought about that. I mean, they have a good engineer on hand. So we thought about that. We thought about air. We thought about some nitrogen reduction. I mean, those are the things that we're going to have look at. That's going to be a problematic system.
Okay. This, for those of you not familiar with this is the proposed boatyard marina / condo complex right on the Guilford border across from Friends and Company.
Yeah, now it's a boat. It's restaurant, boatyard, and retail.
Right.
Now,
So
it's
a lot of
it's
attention
changed.
from the public, but as far as the WPCA is concerned, we always want to make sure that the quality of the system doesn't necessarily just meet public health code, but in a very, we recognize it's an environmentally sensitive area, I guess. And with that being said, nitrogen removal and other kind of tweaks to the system would be favorably looked upon by the WPCA. But I know, Trent, you're working within the confines of your purview, which is
Right.
the DPH and the public health code.
Right. And I do want to add that the library system has officially, that we're just looking for the as-built, but that the library system was probably the latest and greatest, I think from a design flow perspective, the latest and greatest system to be finalized in town, which is like just as recently.
I was a boondoggle anyway. The guy in charge of that building committee was, I don't know what he was thinking about.
Gotta run that guy out of town. That's what I think.
Does that system, Grant, does that have passive nitrogen reduction?
Nah, it's a traditional gallery system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The flows are gonna be pretty low.
Yeah, it's pretty low.
Yeah, the flows aren't that high. The other one is the general's residence, which I mean, there's a project coming up there. You haven't seen anything on that, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I just haven't looked at it. I got Amanda reviewing that one right now.
But those are individual systems, right?
What was that?
They're individual systems, right? Not community.
Individual systems, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Trent. Anyone else have questions for Trent?
Oh, Trent, how's the seasonal groundwater table right now? Is this dry weather dropping it down? What are you hearing and seeing, particularly on Neck Road area?
Particularly on Neck Road area. Oh gosh, no, we haven't really seen too much of it. We've had some problems. So to that point, Graham, we haven't really seen a real drought in the water table. We've been seeing it being pretty consistent. We're still getting high groundwater on some of our test holes, and Neck Road has been problematic. Is always problematic, and that's why we're getting so much soil testing, because some of these are retest. Some of these, we're testing in a different season now, just to get better ideas of the real situation going on. So, but it's kind of been consistent. We haven't really seen that much of a drought in the water table. It's still there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's just my lawn that's brown.
Yeah, your lawn is brown. I think that's a lot of sun. You got to probably try to water it a little bit more.
I'll write that down. It's a good tip.
Or if you overload your septic system, the lawn likes that too. So,
Exactly.
okay. Anyone else for Trent? Okay. Okay, thank you, Trent. Can you stick around for a little bit under some of the old business?
Yeah, I'm going to stick around for a little while.
Okay, great. Thanks for your help on that. Item 5 is the water pollution control plan. There's no one here from the public, and just for Lauren's sake, the WPCP is a document that the WPCA establishes on how to manage wastewater in the town. And it's a guiding document for Trent, as well as the public health code. And so we have this item on the agenda every week, every month, for any edits, changes, or comments that we might have from the members. I don't have any particular issues right now with the current plan. And so I open the floor for anyone who might have any questions or comments.
Well, I think that there was just a concern that we wanted to get the Coastal Resiliency Committee to be able to back the plan so that there's a show of support that this is going to be a useful way to go before it gets to the selectmen's or the Board of Selectmen. And I guess this is more of a question almost like for Graham, because Tommy had mentioned that you were going to speak with Graham about getting an update on how they were viewing the prospect of supporting the water pollution control plan.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And that's coming up on the agenda a little further down. So
Okay.
we'll do that.
Yep.
The water pollution control plan is the existing document that we have that talks about things like how we manage community systems in town, private and public systems, things like that. And I guess one question I might have for Trent is, are there any community systems that are, well, when I say community systems, I'm talking about things like the Muse and that any of those systems need to be addressed in terms of a letter from WPCA to meet their requirements, or are they pretty much on top of everything?
Yeah, nothing at this time, Tom. The
Okay.
latest that I got from one of the community systems, I believe, which might have been maybe Legend Hill, I think I think a buyer was interested in whether or not they can do something with the bedroom, and which would increase design flow. And after I told them that it's a shared system, I think that kind of not turned them away, but just turned the idea away. But nothing needed at this time.
Okay, great. So the existing water pollution control plan explains how these community systems are supposed to escrow some money for repairs and notify us when they use the money and make repairs and things like that. And that's worked pretty well. Trent pretty much manages that. And as long as the WPCA doesn't need to get involved with writing a letter or anything like that, then we're satisfied that you're looking at that appropriately. Anyone else have anything to add to that before we go to some of the other things? Okay, no old business. Graham, let's talk about what's going on with the Resiliency Committee and how we can coordinate our efforts here.
Right, so the committee, we didn't meet for a while, but we've been meeting every 2 weeks for the last month and a half. One of the big items that's the priority for the committee right now is enacting the townwide, flood building code regulations. The town never implemented the one they have is antiquated. DEP came out with a sample code to comply, to bring it into the current code, which we're basically going to, but we're also investigating a couple other variables. One specifically is if we should be more than a foot above the 100-year flood, based on the guidance from the state about looking long range. So we're considering going new requirement to have 2 feet above the 100-year flood. But the nuance is that's more a coastal criteria rather than inland criteria. So we're looking, do we want to kind of do just on the coast, and then inland just do a 1 foot above the 100-year. The second criteria is the look back period for when someone is required, if they spend 50% of the value of the appraised value of the structure, do they need to bring it up to code and i.e. elevate the building? Currently, we only have a 1-year look back, so someone could do 20% for 5 years and never have to bring his building a house up to code. So we're looking at a 5-year look back period. So in the last 5 years, would they have to, if they spent more than 50% of the value, they'd have to bring it up to code and elevate the property. Some towns have gone to 10 years. Somehow, I think a few towns still have 2, but I think we're leaning towards 5. But that's the policy committee on that. The other thing we're doing is we've developed a list of projects, potential shoreline projects, to deal with that. And we also met with the public works director staff and kind of discussed what where their priorities were. And interestingly, they weren't really very focused, particularly on the coastal stuff. They're, as you might suspect, they're maintaining their existing infrastructure, their roads and their pipe network. So in terms of making a priority for the coastal stuff, it is, wasn't a priority. So I'm trying to think, we're thinking more long range planning. And ironically, the thing that's going to hit the town and people's lifestyles more, short of a hurricane happening, of course, is going to probably be the septic systems on Neck Road. Because if we do get 20 inches of sea level rise, as we've discussed, any septic systems that are tidally influenced, probably on Neck Road and some of the other areas, are likely to be impacted. And that could happen even if, 10 inches, I suspect, will have a significant impact of sea level rise. So that's, in some ways, I'm thinking that could become more of our priority for implementation, because Madison doesn't have a lot of really low-lying areas. There's a couple roads that are problematic, but it's not like some towns like Milford or which has tons of coastal community, shoreline shacks, what I call them, vacation properties that were made year round. I mean, you see a lot of that in Clinton too, where there's Clinton and Westbrook, where there's stretches of beaches that were, just seasonal cottages, and people have converted them to year-round use, and they're elevating some of every other house, 15 feet in the air. But that really doesn't describe Madison per se. I mean, other than maybe some properties on Neck Road, but it's not as severe. So, that's kind of my take. So the septic, so it keeps revolving back to the septic concerns we have, and particularly Neck Road and a few other communities as it relates to resiliency.
Okay. And when you talk about Neck Road, you talk about the area defined as kind of Neck Road, including some of those side roads, right?
Yeah, mostly the side roads. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's poor drainage, poor surface drainage. There isn't a lot of so whatever rain falls kind of just sinks into the ground. Plus, there's dunes, and there's outfall pipes in some of those areas, but those have been blocked or silted in. So there's very poor drainage. So sort of this just contributes to the seasonal high groundwater table, or regular high groundwater table.
And raising homes doesn't raise septic systems. But when we talk about raising homes, Graham, I don't know why I keep calling you Graham.
Right. I like it. It's kind of
My nephew's name is Grant.
Right.
And his brother's name is Lee. So figure that
Oh.
one out. Grant and Lee.
I'm sure they have some arguments about statues then.
Oh, yeah. Well, Grant was born in Connecticut. Lee was born in Virginia. So my brother is trying to play both sides of the Mason-Dixon line there. But when we talk about raising houses, are we talking about raising them based on just a normal sea level, or are we talking mostly about storm surge?
Well, the FEMA flood elevation, being at 12 or 13 or 14. So we're talking about raising, a foot or 2 feet above that level. When someone renovates the house or builds a new house.
Yep. Okay.
So, like that house on the Middle Beach Road, the one that is in construction, that's got some fairly substantial walls.
Yep.
Masonry walls. So I think that's like 15. So that would be kind of the example of what we would be talking about.
Yeah, I see there's a house on Surf Club Road that's being elevated pretty significantly. Grant, Trent, what's going on with that house, by the way, the one on Surf Club Road that's being raised up?
Surf Club, I need an address on that one, honestly.
Yeah, it's just a few houses down from the Surf Club. Maybe there's no impact on the septic. I know the house is being raised up.
I know there's a one on down Circle Beach Road that was raised, and system went into the driveway, engineered plan by Harkin. Trying to think about the Surf Club one.
Okay.
The one with the blue, it's got blue construction paper on it?
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm probably not on that one. That's honestly probably Amanda. I've been on a lot of the COVID situations.
Mm-hmm.
But what are your questions about the house? If there's any impact on the septic at all?
Yeah, I was just curious. It probably is no impact, because they're probably not changing the number of bedrooms. They're just raising it up above, whatever.
Yeah. Usually if they're just making it FEMA compliant, they just got to verify that there's a code complying area for the house to be hooked up to, because it's still considered a building conversion. And per 1913 B100A of the Connecticut Public Health Code, when such action is done, a code complying area needs to be determined, which means, like, if it's a 3-bedroom dwelling, a 3-bedroom system needs to be at least established or existing prior to approving that.
Okay. So Graham, as I understand it, the Resiliency Committee is looking carefully at infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure, particularly a wastewater system that would, preclude running into problems in the future with septic systems. And some of these areas, according to the Malone and McBroom report, that was also pointed out that there's some solution was going to be needed for that in the long term. So you're moving probably towards a recommendation, perhaps for which areas are most vulnerable in terms of wastewater disposal. Is that part of what you're looking at?
Yeah, at some point we'll be hiring a consultant probably to do a study. Obviously, the COVID thing has kind of derailed a lot of what we're doing short term. But I think the plan is to come up with a plan. I think, and our charge is septic systems or wastewater is part of our charge to look at. So how that would relate to an updated facilities plan or something that could, related to it. There is a lot of overlap there.
I think the key is going to be identifying parcels of land either presently owned by the town or could be purchased by the town for a community system. Do you think that's something your consultant might be looking at?
It depends how we wrote the scope of work, but yeah,
Mhm.
it might be easier to procure that information through the resiliency planning as opposed to a facility plan, just based on the history. You know, even though
Yeah,
we can
and
get.
based on the fact that you guys are out there in front of this. So I would carry that message through you to the Resiliency Study Committee. Because, you know, without making it really publicly known what parcels might be used at this point, because that just generates too much,
Right.
you know, the rumor mill and everything else. But certainly the WPCA could have a lot of input on that to agree or to suggest parcels of land that might be available. And of course, Trent as well. Trent is be the person that would know a lot about that too.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so guys, I'm gonna take off, head out now, unless there's any other questions.
Well, just the first item under 7, flooding in Smith Bay. We talked with, well, I know we talked in the past, Trent, about looking at that area in particular. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to do that, but, or how much of that goes beyond your scope, you know, I mean, you can only work 36 hours a day, right, Trent?
I don't know, a day or maybe a week, but I mean, yeah. Initially when we first had that idea, I'd done some, light investigative work around that area. I think that with the weather, weather is obviously a big factor. Otherwise, I haven't really seen or heard any real complaints or, seen any real red flags aside from it being a low area. I mean, the grading over there is very low, and we know that there's no drainage over there, and the roads are going to be flooded during a heavy rain or high sea level. So it's something to still keep an eye on, and I think that's going to be ongoing, and more information will be forthcoming. And I think that you're right, to your point, with so much unknown revolved around COVID. It might be worth looking, having maybe another agency look at that, whereas the health department services, we're going to be a lot focused on the health and safety of the public.
Right. I know Tom Lonsdale lives down that way. Do you want to jump here, Tom, with any input?
Yeah, just anecdotally, I think we've been pretty fortunate. This has been definitely a drier year than last year. So I know just kind of what I've heard from other community members, people really haven't been having as many issues with basements flooding and everything like that. So I think that the systems in general have gotten a little bit of a break. I know the groundwater is still high this year, but it's not exceptionally high like it was last year. I mean, last year we're talking a couple feet from the surface. So I think we're pretty fortunate this year. And I think that's a good thing. Obviously I think as Graham brings up, the future is going to be an issue down there as sea level keeps rising. There's nothing we can do. Those septic systems aren't going to raise into the air 15 feet. So it is what it is. But I agree with what Trent's saying. I think it's just something to keep watching in the future. And, hopefully we have a few dry years here and it buys us some time to think about a future plan for that area.
Yeah, and I think the nexus here is going to be the WPCA keeping this on the front burner, and the Resiliency Committee keeping it on as a focus. And at some point, we're going to have to find out what we're going to do in that area. We pretty much know what has to be done, really, but the actual alternatives and the cost for a structural solution and where the system would be put in are all kind of up in the air. And we're going to need to get a consultant involved to really run that analysis for us. So let's all keep that on the front burner. Any other questions for Trent before he leaves?
Well, I'm not sure this is for Trent. I to the extent that Trent is able to just comment on a timeline, or I guess maybe my point is, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of timeline when we're going to be able to bring things before the Board of Selectmen. Obviously you're that for the water control pollution plan for the future, my understanding is that we need to get an okay from the Coastal Resiliency Committee, and the fact that Graham's on that committee and would be able to communicate that it would be nice to get some kind of a sense of when things will happen. So I'm not sure how that involves Trent, and so maybe it's just something again for Graham, and the rest of the talk about.
Yeah, well, my first impression would be that that's something that Tom, as the chair, would look to present at a Board of Selectmen meeting. And obviously I'm liaison for WPCA, so I mean whatever obviously I would do a preliminary have a preliminary conversation with the first select woman about whatever things that we just would discuss from here, or whatever things that you want to bring to present to the board. I would give her at least an update about it, or a heads up about it, and then it would be something that we have to put on the agenda to a Board of Selectmen meeting. And
yeah, I guess I'm saying that it would be good to, I'd like to make a motion
a timeline for that.
Yeah, because when Tom Hansen and I did speak with the first selectman woman, she mentioned that before it comes to the Board of Selectmen, she wants to first get a sense from the Coastal Resiliency Committee that that they are recommending or approving the water control pollution plan. That to have it updated from the 1981 version. So so I guess I want to get a sense of how we're going to communicate with this other committee, because she's going to say, well, look, I'm waiting on us, on the Water Control Pollution Authority.
Okay, the WPCA has in the past and will in the future promote a wastewater facilities plan update. And we're going to talk about that under item 8. But with regard specifically to Smith Bay, I think, like I say, things are coming to a head with both the resiliency and with Trent's own preoccupation with that area. And I think we could probably put together a recommendation to perform a study of the Smith Bay area, or what do we call it? We might call it race east. What's the name of the road? East River Road. East.
Right. I think essentially, Mark, to answer your question, I think as a side note, I think that it's going to be worth at least soliciting the importance of such a resilience plan or remediation plan to not only Smith Bay, but to, I think to your point, you were saying a timeline to address the bigger situation, right? And I could be honest with you. I mean, we're still technically under a public health emergency. And, there's been a lot of emergency funds being used for COVID resources. So, to present something like this in this time, I don't know what merit of opportunity you're going to have, for any, or not you, but, WPCA or anything outside of the scope of what we have on the forefront here, for something like that to get approved, even through Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. But, I can't speak for both of those boards. Again, I'm just, giving my opinion on that. But, I think, that's something that is obviously important. And, whenever the time comes, I'm obviously, you guys know that I'll be here to represent the town and WPCA and be able to provide any guidance that I can for anything to move forward.
Sure. I guess I just wanted to make sure that you knew that the kind of sequence of things that we were looking at. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we know what we want. The question is, does the selectmen know what we want? And do we even know how to frame that in terms of budget and timeline and things like that? So we'll continue to work on that issue as well.
All right.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Mark, thanks for the question. Tom, thanks.
Sure.
Peter, Graham, Tom, I appreciate it.
Good luck with the surgery.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, good
Thanks.
luck, man. I hope you come out the other side with, first of all, without COVID-19, and secondly, with a fixed ankle.
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's a
Anything
bad
else,
time to
Lauren?
be going in for elective surgery, but you got to do it, right? I mean, it's not
Right.
elective surgery. Yeah.
Right. Lauren, anything else? Did you have anything else, Lauren? All right, maybe not. So, all right, guys, take it easy. I'll be on. Oh, I get it. I'll be on the next meeting though, Tom.
Thanks, Trent.
All righty. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Good luck.
And thanks, Graham, for that report. Item 7 is septic problem areas. So we talked a little bit about Smith Bay.
Oh, but can I just forgive me for harping on the
Go ahead. Yeah,
Resiliency
go ahead.
Committee, but because I did appreciate Trent's point, which is that nothing's going to happen during this emergency period of time with COVID, and yet it seems like that this is a good time to, especially like Graham, you were pointing out, you guys have been meeting every 2 weeks. So my sense is that in terms of asking for them to back the idea of a plan, I'm not sure how much we have to define this, because my goodness, isn't the idea of a plan based on the idea that things will get defined by actually bringing in a consultant to be able to work on this, on not only some of the septic problems in the town, but then what are the possible solutions? I'm not sure that we're supposed to come up with that.
Mark, you're right on with that. There's the town-wide study is something we've been promoting for a long time, and that's a big nut. And under item 8, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's been going on in some of the other communities. But we might have to, I'd say we might have to, I think we have to present to the selectmen do the Smith Bay study, townwide facilities plan, to address different issues. So I'd be looking for an opportunity to do that with the selectmen. And maybe you can help me out with that through the Democratic Committee, of which you're a member. And that has the ear of course, Peggy Lyons and the other selectmen. And perhaps we can make a joint presentation to them as a starting point to see if we can get some interest on the part of the selectmen to do some of these projects. What do you think?
Well, I think Peggy was mentioning that she was looking specifically from the Madison Resiliency Committee for them to be able to back the back the plan. I think that I think it's kind of an additional. I think you're pointing out it would be nice for the community to know more about what the possible problems are in town, and so sure, I guess I could see, having some type of presentation to other groups. Might not even just be that one, committee, or group, in terms of the Democratic Committee. But I was just, I'm even thinking about even you and I perhaps even writing like a letter to the editor to even publicize some of the concerns that we have. That would be another way of continuing to highlight some of the concerns, that they, that have been talked about here.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask Tom about that. What's the feeling among the community in Smith Bay, for example, for getting going on some structural solution, some long-term solution for those people?
I think if I can speak freely, I think that most people are concerned overall long-term, and I think realize that there needs to be a solution. I do think people are nervous maybe about the cost of what that solution might be, and how that cost might be maybe paid for by the people in Smith Bay, if that's kind of what that comes down to. So I think that overall is a concern amongst the community, but I do think everyone is cognizant of the fact that there's no escaping this. Eventually, we're going to have to deal with the problem. We might as well look at what some of the solutions are going to be.
Yeah, right.
I certainly think that we would much rather do this with the town's backing rather than have to try to go out on our own and try to find solutions.
Oh, of course. I would say that would be definitely the proposal. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, I think you and I have seen in our business that without regulations, nothing gets done. If we don't have an approved water pollution control plan, then we can talk all we want or try to raise awareness all we want. People are not going to do anything unless there's a plan to follow. And you just might create resistance to the board if you can't point to a document that says, hey, people should be doing this and this and this.
Right. Yeah, so it comes back, I guess we have to decide as a WPCA what exactly we want to ask for or recommend. Our advisor, we're really an advisory group, so what we advise the town to do. And I mean, Peggy seems to think that the Resiliency Committee might be the impetus for this. And I don't necessarily disagree with her, but it's really not their job to do wastewater planning for the entire town. They're looking at, developing codes and identifying problems and opportunities with specific areas in town. So I think
we can take the plan as you've written it and just go with it, as act as if it is approved.
What plan is that, Peter?
Right, the Madison Water Pollution Control Plan, item number 5, the one that you show.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that is currently our plan. I mean, we're doing that now. That's our operating plan at the moment. But it's not it's not the wastewater facilities plan, which would look long-term at things like where are we going to put in sewers, where are we going to build a treatment plant, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's what we have to develop.
Yeah, right.
So, so without that, to talk about what to do it's like shooting blanks,
Okay.
as far as I can see.
Mhm.
Well, another way that this was talked about when we met with the DEP fellow Carlos Escara. We looked at not only, well, they just kind of reiterated that things have to be focused on kind of remediating a literally a water pollution a problem, but there was also talk about even the economic development and just looking at studying whether there's a benefit to having sewers in the on Main Street for the town. And so I guess I was thinking it's divided between what are the trouble spots. So it's like two questions, isn't it? One is where's the trouble spots in town where we need to have a plan, perhaps to follow up with being able to develop the different districts for water pollution control, and then and perhaps is there something specific to Main Street, that might also help or with economic development. I mean, is that? I mean, that's the way I've understood our discussions to go during this past year or so.
Well, that would kind of come out of the wastewater facilities plan. Although economic development is not the WPCA's purview, it certainly is the town's, okay? So they can proceed any way they want with economic development projects. But specifically right now, we have an RFP developed, we have a plan developed for doing a facilities plan, and the town has not agreed to fund that plan. So we're backing down a little bit by saying, well, maybe we can do something more locally targeted, things like Smith Bay and Arbor Lane, where there's some more pressing issues that have to be done. These would probably not be funded by DEP because they're not part of a facilities plan, but they still might yield worthwhile solutions to follow up with. So with regard to septic system problem areas, we talked about Smith Bay, we talked about beach communities. Well, we didn't really talk about that, requiring DEP general permit. I think that's more of an issue for Trent, he's not with us anymore. And Arbor Lane, Arbor Lane keeps coming up because they don't have public water. They have wells and septic on the same lot, and they're completely surrounded by areas that do have public water. Arbor Lane is off of, well, it's behind Wall Street, it's off of Scotland Road. It's behind the Clarity Building. And I think there's a concern that's been voiced in the past by some of the residents that their water supply may be in jeopardy from all those septic systems on Wall Street, Clarity, and the restaurants, and a lot of development going on there. But another concern is that they can't expand their septic systems when they do fail, because they have to maintain a separating distance from the wells which may not be achievable. So that's another area of septic issues that we're kind of keeping appraised of, and we've asked Trent to keep that on the front burner. If opportunities arrive to, put in a water system there, we should support that. Anyone want to comment on that? Now,
No, I guess I still didn't understand. I have to admit, I'm still stuck on the fact that in the past, the updated plan that was not accepted by the Board of Selectmen, just because in the past they hadn't accepted it, that they wouldn't really take a good look at this more comprehensive view of what we should be doing as a plan for a plan for the town.
Mhm.
Well,
let's put it up right here then, Mark. Is there a motion you want to make for action that, I think you're on the right track, and I support what you're saying. Can we put that in the form of some kind of a motion for action by the WPCA?
Well, I have to admit, I was just, before doing that, I was just trying to make sure I wasn't putting undue pressure on Graham as being a spokesperson, for our group to the Resiliency Committee. I'm just, yeah, my motion would be that I'd like to make a motion that the Madison Resiliency Committee accept or just review what we have as the water control pollution plan, and to the extent that it also deals with some of their worries about the flooding in Smith Bay, or the rising tide levels that Graham brought up, then I'd like to, so I guess the motion is to ask the Madison Resiliency Committee to approve the plan that we've already approved here. And so I guess that's the motion.
Okay, so maybe not a motion to approve, but motion to endorse
Yes.
the WPCA plan for overall wastewater management plan for the town. And not to put words in your mouth, Mark or Grant, but that would be as a sound approach to wastewater issues arising from sea level, sea level rise, right?
Yes.
Does that sound like what you were talking about, Mark?
Yes, that it dovetails their worries about rising sea level, and we are, and that is, as you were pointing out, only one component of this overall plan that we had, but we wanted them to endorse the idea of that we have this plan that would incorporate what they are concerned about.
Okay, so let me just recap this. Let's say Mark has made a motion to request that the Madison Resiliency Committee endorse the WPCA plan for a wastewater facilities plan as a, what did I write here? As a sound approach to wastewater issues arising from sea level rise. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
What do you think, Graham? You're on mute. Okay, Graham, what do you think?
Well, I
We
mean,
would just
it comes
be-
down to funding. I mean, the big issue is, I mean, obviously the budgets are tight and there was talk about funding a consultant to do some study work, but I don't think that we'd be funding, there won't be money to do a townwide facilities plan, but I think there would be potentially some money to funding localized areas that were clearly under the influence, of tidal influence and, geology, so, a sandy geology. So I would suggest maybe if you could define some of the areas like Smith Bay, and if there's a couple other ones that are clearly subject to that, we could, when we ask for funding, we can incorporate those areas. But I don't think we're going to be asking for $300,000.
No. And I don't think Mark is saying, as the WPCA has proposed the wastewater facilities plan, and it's not part of the purview of the Resiliency Committee to do it. I think Mark is just saying, would you be willing to endorse the WPCA's recommendation that the town undertake a wastewater facilities plan as a sound approach to managing wastewater issues in these areas subject to sea level rise?
Yeah, I think the technical subcommittee could probably agree with that. But, as you know, the politics of getting the funding is another.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've been struggling with that for years. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But is that what you were talking about, Mark?
Right, exactly. That the only way that I'm bothering to look at what's going on with the Madison Resiliency Committee's work is because Peggy mentioned that she wanted us to talk to each other, and I guess I was just turning to you, Graham, because you're on the committee there, and have a sense of what's been happening here, in our committee, and just so in terms of the politics of this, Peggy just wanted to make sure that we're doing that people are understanding what we're asking for in terms of our plan, and this would not be, we wouldn't be looking to Madison Resiliency program or committee for any funding. That's something that, as you were pointing out, is something that would come from the state, and also it's not lost on me what Trent was saying, which is, and even for this town to go forward with this, that they may not want to look at this because of all the COVID concerns. It's just that I'd like to be able to see us moving things along, at least with the people that are focused on this problem right now, which I think is the Madison Resiliency Committee, as well as, as us. So that's why, I'm glad that Tom was asking me to just make a motion to asking for an endorsement, and I it would be just nice to for us to be talking with the Resiliency Committee more too.
Thank you, Mark. And that does kind of key in with, I think what Peggy was saying was she'd like to be assured that, she likes the idea of coordinating efforts and bringing committees together to jointly propose things. I forget, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but general consensus, if you will. So we'll put that in the minutes, and Graham, if you need us to do a specific reach out to the Resiliency Committee, I can certainly do that at your next meeting. But we're going to say that we made a motion to request that the Madison Resiliency Committee endorse the Water Pollution Control Authority's plan to develop a townwide wastewater facilities plan. And there's a period. Such a plan would serve as, such a plan would be a sound approach to wastewater management issues in areas of rising sea level, something like that. I'll put something in here.
No, Graham,
Asking Graham is to push that out, you know, a little bit.
Graham, do you think
Take it up and you may decide not to, but
help for us to almost like invite other members of the Resiliency Committee to come to one of our meetings?
Graham's kind of on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you attended the one of our last full meeting of the entire committee, because there's subcommittees. So I think you attended that. So I think it was well received. To be honest, if you had to have an up-down vote, whether all of the entire committee would support it, I don't know where that would fall. Obviously,
Right.
I mean, the Smith Bay thing, I think they'd be very more than willing to look at that area because it's clearly in their purview. But I don't know how they would feel about, you know.
Well, if you guys came out and said you should get a consultant to study Smith Bay, I mean, WPCA would support that.
Yeah, I think that's more likely the scenario is, you know,
Yeah.
and when we get some money, obviously, with the budgets are tight and there's zero increase in taxes, and I'm sure they're worried about actually collecting some of this revenue. So there's a lot, you know, I'm not really pushing for a entire consultant in the near term.
Right.
You know,
Well, money is always an issue. I mean, you can't get around that.
right, you know, so I think there was an opportunity. We were told we'd probably get some funding, but you know, so,
Yeah.
and I have been pushing the septic element of it, but I don't know how much that resonates with people and the rest of the committee.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, if there are other areas like Smith Bay that I would be good to know that, you know, that are low-lying and tidally influenced with the history.
Well,
of septic
there's something called Fence Creek.
Yep.
And there's Buffalo Bay. These are the same areas I think that Malone and McBroom identified in their overview of the resiliency needs.
Right. So if we could do a narrowly, if we do get an opportunity to do this and hire a consultant, if we could do, you know, those 3-4 areas,
Mhm.
and then we can, you know, incorporate that part of it.
Yeah. Now, does Trent meet with you guys?
No, Dave Anderson is on the committee. Yeah, he's a voting member.
What's that?
Dave Anderson is a voting
Right.
member of the committee, and Al Goldberg generally sits in.
Okay, yeah. When's your next meeting?
Let's see here. Let's check my calendar.
It's July 8th.
Thanks, Lauren.
Welcome.
Will that be a live meeting, do you think? Or
I
will
don't think so.
It'll be run just as this. We're not going back to in-person meetings until most likely September at the earliest.
Okay,
So that's July 8th at like 7 o'clock? Or 6 o'clock?
I'm looking it up. I think it's at 7.
Okay.
okay, great, Mark. Let's make a note of that and
Right.
participate in that.
Yeah, it starts at 7.
Okay, great. Okay. Wastewater facilities plan, we kind of touched on that already, and we know where that stands. But let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in some other communities, okay? I spoke with Christy Wagner of CDM Smith. They did a facilities plan for Clinton, and that's been completed and approved by DEEP, which basically said that the downtown area of Clinton would be sewered to properties that are, some properties on East Main, some on West Main, for a community septic system. And they're presently doing soil testing for that. The problem is that it's probably never going to be approved because of how expensive it is. So that's a good thing for us to know. I mean, you can do the best plan possible and say, you know, this is the real solution. But if it's going to cost $30,000 or $40,000 per unit to construct these things, you're going to run into, you know, it's a project that doesn't go anywhere. So, and I'm just throwing that out as food for thought. That's why I think when we do our plan, it should focus more on wastewater management districts and updated codes for on-site systems for the most part, and structural solutions only for those areas that really can't be handled on site.
So Tom, in Clinton, if the plan is not going to go ahead, what are the ramifications of that?
Well, that's a good question, Peter, because the plan was funded by DEEP. It was run, or I'm sorry, it was the town of Clinton's plan, and it was the town of Clinton's recommendation to do certain things. Now, if they're not going to implement those things, they're going to run up against the DEEP's consent order, and it may go the route of like an old Saybrook, where there's going to be a prolonged series of lawsuits with the DEEP, you know, constantly trying to force the town to implement the recommended plan that the town has already, you know, said they're going to do.
So eventually it sounds like things keep getting kicked down the road and money keeps getting spent for people to bring lawsuits and make studies, and it's going to end up costing more money in the long term. So people are going to have to spend the money one way or the other, right?
Yeah, and Clinton is undergoing a change. They're going to a town manager form of government. And so I don't really know if that's going to have an impact or not.
Yeah, it's in place already. Now they have a town manager.
Right.
So what are the ramifications for the town, the folks that live in Madison here? If our facilities plan isn't funded, I really don't see any harm in that, because the DEEP is not on our back to do anything. Is that right?
Well, there's a couple of things I would say about that. Number one is the DEEP can order the town to update the wastewater facilities plan, okay? And the reason that they would do that is because the town of Madison's WPCA has recommended that as a long-term project. But more importantly, I think, and this is what we've been saying all along, Peter, is we don't want to be in a position of being ordered by DEEP to do an update of the plan. We want to take the initiative and update the plan. And when we do so, we don't want to just give lip service to what the recommended plan is. We want it to be the right plan for Madison. And if it's the right plan for Madison, we don't think there will be a problem being funded. But, you know, this is the kind of thing you have to work out with your consultant. You know, what is it going to look like? What is the consultant going to look at?
Yeah, but Tom, I think it's apparent to me that unless we're forced to do something, nothing is going to get done. Because I've been attending these meetings for years and nothing seems to get done or move forward. So unless the state is telling us we need to do something, the first selectmen are not allocating money for a facilities plan and nothing's getting done. So, I mean, we can keep talking about things a lot. I mean, you guys are nice folks to talk to, but nothing is getting done because we're not being forced to do anything.
Mhm. You're right. You're right. But that doesn't change.
Mark, if you want to get something done, call up somebody in Hartford and tell them to get on our case, and then the first selectman will fund the plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens sometimes.
But Mark, I wouldn't do that unless you talked it over with Tom first.
No, I knew you were being rhetorical, you know, and I didn't take it as something that I should really do after the meeting.
But what I think what I'm saying though, Peter, and what you're hinting at is the facilities plan is one thing, okay, that has to be funded. The recommended plan, I mean, the mistake they made in Clinton was they recommended a plan that they didn't really want. I mean, they let the consultant dictate to them what the recommended plan should be. Okay. And that plan is, from a practical standpoint, it's not affordable by the town.
Well, then maybe what we should do is ask for a scope, a well-defined scope. And Tom, you certainly were in the business. You know how to approach the scope on this thing. And perhaps a phase 1 scope would be Buffalo Bay, Smith Bay. You know, we could probably identify 2 or 3 or 4 like major key areas that are minimal cost to fund, and then have a phase 2 plan, which, you know, covers a little more broader facilities that are recommended townwide. And then that way, you know, if the town only funded enough money for phase 1, which was the real critical stuff in our opinion, and then we had a consultant kind of confirm those small number of critical items so that people in town can't say, well, you WPCA folks, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know these areas. You're just presuming these areas are key areas. But if we have the consultant to back up our decision of these very small key areas as a phase 1, then maybe the town funds that. You know, that's a pretty low dollar amount to fund. And then, you know, as money becomes available, you do phase 2 of the plan or phase 3 of the plan or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great option. And I'm looking at that. I'm thinking about that as more and more of the way to go, because the Clinton experience turned out to be not a very good experience for everyone involved. They had a couple of good plans. They wanted to do Rocky Ledge water mains, which is kind of like our Arbor Lane situation, where they had to get water in there so people could upgrade their systems. But that's being held up by Connecticut Water Company.
You know, so maybe what we do is we partner up with the Resiliency Committee to identify what we think is phase 1 critical stuff from a WPCA standpoint. And it actually coincides with what Resiliency is doing. And then that way it might be easier for the town to fund that phase 1 initiative of our facilities plan. And because I do think you need a consultant's name on it so that the town, the residents in the town really can't fight it.
Yeah, well, that's what we've been saying all along. We could draw circles in the town around environmentally sensitive areas and ask Trent to require, you know, whatever, passive nitrogen or, you know, changes in standards for septic systems in those areas. And we might be spot on with that. But the moment he tries to implement that, someone's going to say, well, where's the scientific data that, that this is an appropriate solution for our area, or we should be doing that. And that's what the consultant would do. The consultant would pull together the demographic and the geologic and the hydro data and the environmental impact to come up with that plan. And that's exactly right. So maybe we see moving forward a little bit more of a more focused, smaller project.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the way that this becomes a smaller project, again, I keep on going back to that conversation with Carlos Escavera, where we basically did present places like Smith Bay and some of the other shoreline communities, and as opposed to what I was bringing up about Main Street. And he pretty much was saying that could still end up being something like $100,000 cost for a study like that. And my misunderstanding how to reduce the scope, as Peter was suggesting? Is there ways of making sure it's not that that expensive?
Well, that remains to be seen. I think what Carlos was saying, though, is the DEP gets involved with the town-wide plan, not necessarily truncated studies of specific areas.
Oh, okay, so we're not going to do this with DEP. This is like Peter, your idea was more just come up with the town, just come up with money for a consultant, just for something that's really targeted to. Again, I'll just use the example of Smith Bay.
Well, it depends. I would rather see the state pay for the full plan, implemented in parts, in phases. We can go to the state and say we have a citywide plan. This is the plan we're going to do over these certain amount of years as money becomes available. So the first part of it is going to be, I don't know, I'm throwing out numbers, $40,000 to do Smith Bay and Buffalo Bay, and then we're going to do that in phase one. So then, okay, you've allocated $150,000 for us. We're going to use 40 of it now. We're going to use another, I don't know, 80,000 later when we do the central downtown area. And then we're going to do phase three, 2 or 3 or 4 years later, and use up the rest of the money for whatever else there is. So, I mean, that's the way I see it, as a compromise for everybody. That way, maybe the town doesn't have to pay for the study. The state pays for it, and we're proactive about it. We're trying to get this stuff done before they come down on us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's an approach that we can look at. Yeah. I don't know well, I can't speak for the DEP. I don't know. But.
No, but I think, Tom, you probably have the knowledge to come up with a phased approach to a facilities plan.
Yeah, but no question about it. In fact, what you're saying, Peter, is spot on. You develop the scope for the overall plan, but you break it into phases, is what you're saying.
Yeah, as we can get funding for it, because right now, I think we're getting with the virus situation, we don't have an extra dollar. But if we could go back to the selectmen and say, look, previously we were looking at $100,000, but now we changed our mind. Now we're thinking maybe we could spend 30 to begin with, another 80 later, and we'll do it in phases. We'll get the state to pay for it, as long as they know it's our intention to do the whole plan, but over a certain time period.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think it's worth doing. the study costs are one thing, implementation is another, but will come out of the study. So, yeah, and you know, what the hell, a DEP might say that's better than nothing, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, Tom, you could almost write the facilities plan and get a consultant to put his name on it for a couple of bucks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Peter.
I mean, you know, and you know, maybe the town pays you to do the study and they pay you some amount to do it, and then the consultant puts their name on it. I don't know. I'm trying to think creatively here.
A net zero is what you're saying. Yeah, you're right about that. And in fact, when we did the RFP originally, we did have a couple of phases, but with knowledge now, since we wrote that RFP, which is back 3 or 4 years ago, we could certainly break it down even further. That's a great idea, Peter. Why don't we look at a new direction, if you will, about a townwide study and say, look, we at least know enough to point a consultant in a direction that reflects our level of concern for specific areas.
Yeah, and more tightly define the scope compared to what Clinton did.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's always a problem. Old Saybrook was the same way 20 years ago. They came up with their own plan. They took the DEP's money, did a study, came up with their own plan, said, this is what we're going to do. And then everyone in town said, well, we're not going to pay for it. You know?
Well, you know, it's a lot like our business. You know, some of the treatment plant operators in the state, they know what they want. They know what equipment they want. They know what process they want. And they tell their engineer, go design this. There's other treatment plant.
Uh-oh, we lost you there, Peter.
Yeah, yeah.
You're in mid thought. Okay.
And, you know, in our case, I think we have some pretty knowledgeable people on the board here. We can make a very good, tightly written scope and tell them this is what we want.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we try that for our next meeting? Let me take the initiative and start putting something together and circulate it to all the board members and see what comes out of our next meeting. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
I think that's a good idea, Peter.
All right, I hate to do this, guys, but I got to run. I got 2 grandsons over here that want me to tuck them to bed or something.
Well, don't you have a dog they can play with or something?
Yeah, we've been trying to keep them occupied all week. I got to last until Saturday.
All right, have fun, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys and girls. Bye-bye.
And just write a couple of notes here. Okay, great. Okay, number 9, guidelines for wastewater management districts. I sent them out again to you guys, and I'm just looking for some feedback on that. Obviously, we don't have those guidelines in place. We don't have an ordinance in place because we felt that was more driven by a facilities plan that would recommend that. But maybe it's time to take that and just, well, we have kind of proposed it to the selectmen, but only through Trent's office. And I think Trent does kind of what we want there with regard to looking at specific areas that need different criteria. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think he knows the areas that are problematic.
And this
It negotiates.
we put together as an exercise to say, what would it look like if we had, you know, if we took all the resiliency areas and made them the management districts. But of course, the resiliency areas are impacted by rising sea level. So not just things like nitrogen loading and stuff like that.
Right. But they're similar. They're areas of shared concerns in the resiliency planning. You know, the pockets of areas that are identified that are similar, you know, constraints.
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of back burner stuff. It's old business. Just keep that in mind that, Mark, you're probably wondering exactly what that means, but the wastewater management districts would be a way to continue using on-site septic systems, but with a little more oversight and development and engineering in environmentally sensitive areas. To reduce nitrogen loadings and to improve performance. That means they would be more expensive, but not as expensive as trying to sewer an area. If these areas are kind of not impacted by sea level rise, they would be areas that might get nitrogen remediation incorporated into the septic systems when they're rebuilt or replaced or new ones go in. And the funding for that, I mean, you could just say, well, the homeowner has to do it, but I think it would make more sense if the town had a funding program to say, you know, your 20,000, Mark, your 20,000 system, your $20,000 system is now a $30,000 system, but maybe we'll split the difference with, you know, come up with a $5,000.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that perhaps you were even talking about like one of the things that you've mentioned on other occasions in terms of instead of having a hodgepodge of different septic systems, and again, I'm just zeroing in since we've talked about it with Smith Bay, to then have a community system or septic system where the leaching field is more like in the Buffalo Bay, Bay area, where it gets, I don't know whether it's pumped out or, but that's what I was imagining when you said that maybe that it's on site, you have the on-site septic, but you might have other types of ways of manage it without having to do a continued kind of sewer avoidance.
Exactly. That's what the management district approach is supposed to achieve, right? So we're kind of doing that a little bit, but we don't have the ordinance in place and we don't have the scientific analysis in place to designate these districts. What we have is Trent's understanding of the technical feasibility of incorporating some of these and the willingness of the property owners to spend the money.
Yeah, so like when you write up this scope of that Peter was bringing up, so it sounds like that one of the questions might be in what parts of town would it, not that you're supposed to come up with the answer here, but the question that should be asked of the consultant and the rationale for having a study is, well, at what part of town it needs this additional treatment for nitrogen, or what systems needed so that it does become part of a code, so that it's backed up as Peter was bringing up. And then also the question is, well, and to what extent our notion of possibly having a community system here for Smith Bay, in what way would that help? So it'd be questions like that that you would address in the document for the next.
I think so. I think I have a general idea. Graham has seen this before too in his capacity as a consulting engineer. So he'll have some input, some valuable insight into that.
Sure.
So let's put something together and see what pops out after the next meeting. Yeah. I did talk to Dave Anderson about the strategic plan, because as you recall, WPCA had a few comments on that.
Right.
Dave thinks it's dead. So I don't know what we spent for the consultant, but I don't know. Lauren, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. So I wouldn't say it's dead, but I would say that, you know, we spent a significant amount of money a year to 18 months ago to go through the whole process. We were not 100% satisfied with the product of the company that was hired. But that being said, we did work out what we considered a mostly final draft, and that was before this past election. And Peggy came to office and did say that she wanted to review it and make some changes and kind of change up the format a little, and then COVID happened. So I will tell you that it is on our horizon to get back at this fall. But it is, you know, technically it is in place.
Okay. Good. Back on track in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be right back.
I'm sure that's much more interesting than these meetings, right? Lauren's probably pulling her hair out right now. The downtown sewer study is something that's just been hanging, has no real impetus right now. It was, you know, Tom Banish and people were kicking it around. Tom had a few consultants in to talk about, you know, sewering downtown. Unless somebody wants to bring that up as a separate initiative somewhere, you know, we'd be delighted to discuss it, but it's not our purview because that's an economic development project for the most part. I mean, you can't really divorce it from environmental issues, but the whole impetus previously was to try to, you know, get more occupancy downtown. And there were a lot of, you know, a lot of ground has to be covered for that. A lot of study has to go into that. But, you know, you've got properties like, what is it, the JC Field, the Lowry Field. You got the treatment plant at Stop and Shop. There's a lot of different assets that can be brought to bear if you wanted to sewer the downtown area. But the WPCA doesn't have the resources or anything to evaluate that. That's really got to be something that's driven by the town or the Economic Development Committee, I think. Anybody else want to comment on that?
No, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay. Any new business that anyone wants to bring up? Any questions or comments? Mark, how's your septic system coming?
Let's put it this way. I'm still evaluating the different possibilities.
Does any of them cost less than 20 grand?
Yes.
I feel for you, man. I know what you're going through. Lauren, did any citizens join us?
We do not have any members of the public on tonight.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting and thank all the attendees. Thank you, Lauren, for staying on.
No problem.
And I'll get the minutes out in a couple of days. I got to get them out, what, 48 hours, right?
Yep.
Very good. Thank you all. And
Okay, boy, thanks, Tom.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
to see
thank you. Take care.
And Graham. Yeah.